what I want to discuss is some of the findings of my laboratory and of laboratories around the world on what we know about music and the brain. Music was one of the very first questions taken up by the early experimental psychologists in the late 1800s. The reason for the explosion of research in the last 20 years is twofold, I think. One is that until 20 years ago, we couldn't accurately record and reproduce music. If you were using tape or records, there were speed fluctuations and distortion, and it wasn't really until the widespread availability of digital technology that we had control over the stimuli. The other is neuroimaging, of course. There's been this move towards the neuralization of mental processes, the move towards understanding the biology that's been largely enabled by neuroimaging technology. And just as a nice little full circle kind of story, the very first neuroimaging machines were developed by research laboratories of EMI with the money that they made from the Beatles. One of the things we've found is that music engages regions throughout the brain. In fact, it engages more regions of the brain than almost anything else that we know of. These are images from Sting's brain. I had the opportunity to scan the musician Sting, and this is while he's listening to music. And you see that there's activation in both halves of the brain, and we find that also when he's composing. All manner of musical operations are bilateral. Now, there is an interesting leftward shift as people develop more expertise. We find that musicians with more practice engaging in ordinary musical functions, like listening, analyzing a score, playing music, or talking about music, naming intervals, they tend to use more of their left brain than do non-musicians, and this increases with musical expertise. And the parsimonious explanation for this is that they're having to recruit their language centers in order to talk about music and to think about music, and that's the involvement of the left brain largely. Music engages the auditory cortex early on, and it might not be obvious, but music isn't all processed there, and it's not all processed in one manner. So the auditory cortex is really the first way station for the sound in the cortex, and then it gets parceled out to these specialized processing units. One of the parts of the brain that interests me most is the prefrontal involvement in music. Whether you realize it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you're a musician or not, your brain, when you're listening to music, is constantly trying to figure out what's going to come next. Now, most music has some kind of a tempo, some kind of a beat. So for the most part, you know when the next event is going to be, but you don't know exactly what it's going to be. And that's part of the thrill of music, of course. The skillful composer has to meet your expectations some of the time so that you feel you're in communication with him or her. But that composer also has to violate your expectations some of the time, not just to keep you on your mental toes, but to keep your interest. So it's not just that people are telling us they like music, but we're seeing the neural evidence of it in just the place where you would expect to find it. It's not to say that listening to music is like taking a drug or like having sex. That's not the claim. It's just that it's activating the same reward circuit and some of the same mechanisms. When this study first came out 7 years ago, it was Fox News that said that McGill researchers had found the sex, drugs, rock and roll area of the brain. Finally, I want to talk a bit about music and language. How do you find a sentence that is equated for the emotional component of a piece of music? How do you find a sentence that has a big pitch trajectory, or that has many of the same rhythmic components of music? So the problem is to somehow equate them both at a psychoacoustic level and at an emotional level, and this has proved very difficult, and a number of researchers have tried. We decided to take a different approach. We're going to look at the part of the brain that processes the structure, that is the expectations for these two domains, speech versus music. What we found is that when we compared scrambled music to its unscrambled counterpart, or scrambled speech to its unscrambled counterpart, we found activation in that little sliver of tissue I mentioned earlier, Brodmann area 47, which had already been shown to be responsible for predicting what comes next in sign language and in certain visual sequences and in speech. We found it was also activated when people were trying to figure out what's going to come next in music and speech. I just want to close by reviewing some of the evidence for music and health outcomes. The promise of music for psychological health is that it can enrich our lives, certainly, and make us happier and increase mood just, outside of a clinical setting. It helps connect us to our past, it connects us to others, it connects us to our true selves, many people say. When my grandmother turned 80, my mother and I bought her a little portable keyboard from Radio Shack. My grandmother wasn't a musician and she didn't know how to play, but she was a Holocaust survivor and she had escaped Germany, and she was very happy to be in the United States. And she told us on her 80th birthday, I think one of the cousins said, what is it that you look forward to and what keeps you going every day at the age of 80? Grandma said that what kept her going was that she woke up every morning and she sang God Bless America, because she was so grateful that her family was saved from the Holocaust. And so my mother and I bought her this keyboard, and we taped with masking tape little numbers on it for the melody so that she could plink it out. And on her 81st birthday, she showed us that she had not only learned to play it from memory, she had taken off the tape, but she had learned a sort of rudimentary harmony with her left hand. And she played that song every morning until she died at the age of 97. And I have to think that that had something to do with her sense of purpose and self-mastery and keeping her brain young, and all of the wonderful benefits of music that we've been talking about. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to open it up for questions.